envelope was from Northern Trust, and it was addressed to the man I had been buying the store-brand blood pressure pills for because he swore the name-brand ones would put him in the poorhouse. I almost didn't open it. I'm not a snooper, 41 years married to my first husband, and I never once went through his pockets. But the return address stopped me cold, because Northern Trust is not where you keep a man's social security check, and the man whose name was on that envelope had told me, more times than I could count, that the government check was just about all he had. I sat down at my kitchen table with the morning light coming in slantwise across the oilcloth, and I slid my thumb under the flap and I read the words "Quarterly Review of Your Managed Portfolio," and then I read a number with a comma in a place I did not expect, and then another comma after that. $8,600,000 and some $1,000. My reading glasses fogged up. I took them off, wiped them on my apron like that would change the figures, and put them back on. Same number, $8.5 million, sitting in an account in Chicago, belonging to a man who had let me pay the man at the Sunoco station $40 to top off the Freon in his truck not 3 weeks ago because he said he couldn't justify the expense. I heard his boots on the back porch. He always wiped them twice. That man, 3 years, and he never once tracked sawdust into my house. The screen door creaked, and I sat there holding the proof that the whole thing, every tender, careful piece of it, had been built on top of a lie the size of a barn. He came around the corner with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a smudge of wood stain on his thumb, and he saw my face, and he saw the letter, and the color went out of him like somebody had pulled a plug. "How long have you known?" I asked him. My voice didn't sound like my own. He didn't insult me by pretending. He set down the little jar of brass screws he'd been carrying, set it down so careful, and he said, "Since before I ever walked into that clock shop and saw you standing there with Wendell's mantel clock under your arm. Let me tell you how a sensible 63-year-old widow ends up at her own kitchen table, blindsided like a girl. I lost my first husband on a Tuesday in February, 3 years before any of this. Wendell went out to scrape the windshield before church, and his heart just quit on him in the driveway, and a man who had never been late for anything in his life was 40 minutes late getting up, and by the time I went to look for him, it was over. 41 years. You don't get over a thing like that. You just learn to carry it. After the funeral, the casseroles came, and then the casseroles stopped, and then it was just me in a house built for two with a furnace that knocked at night. My daughter wanted me to move out to her place in Columbus, into the finished basement, and I told her I'd rather be buried next to her father than live in anybody's basement, which was unkind, and I apologized later, but I meant the part about staying in my house. The trouble was, I didn't know what I was for anymore. 41 years, I had a man to feed and worry over. I knew what time he liked his coffee and which shirts he wouldn't wear and how to talk him down off a bad mood. All of that knowing, all that practice love, and suddenly it had nowhere to go. I'd stand at the stove and cook for two out of habit and then scrape half of it into the trash. My sister kept telling me to find a hobby. I didn't want a hobby. I wanted somebody to knead their eggs a certain way. Wendell's mantel clock had stopped the same week he did. It was his grandfather's, a walnut thing with Roman numerals and a chime that always ran about 90 seconds fast, and Wendell would never let anybody touch it because he liked it fast, said it gave him a head start on the day. After he passed it just sat there silent on the mantel, and that silence got to bothering me more than anything in that house. A clock that doesn't tick in a house with one person in it is about the loneliest sound there is, which makes no sense. A silent thing being a sound, but there it is. So one Saturday, I wrapped that clock in a bath towel and drove it over to the little repair shop on Diamond Street that I'd passed 1,000 times and never gone into. Sign in the window, hand-painted, said clocks, watches, smalling kinds, honest work. And the man behind the counter looked up at me over a pair of half glasses, and he had the kindest, most ordinary face I'd seen in months. Not handsome, big ears, gray stubble, hands like a man who'd worked. But there was something settled about him. Most people, you can feel them wanting something off of you. He just looked like a man who had enough. I set the clock on his counter and unwrapped it, and I'll be darned if I didn't start to cry right there in front of a stranger because the last hands to wind that clock were Wendell's, and I hadn't been able to bring myself to do it. He didn't make a fuss, didn't pat my arm or tell me everything happened for a reason, which is the thing people say that makes you want to throw something. He just slid a box of tissues across the counter, real casual, like he kept them there for exactly this. And he said, "These old grandfather's clocks, they keep more than time." And then he busied himself with his screwdriver so I could pull myself together with a little dignity. He had it ticking in 20 minutes. Cleaned out 40 years of dust, oiled the works, set the chime. And when I asked what I owed him, he waved it off and said the first stop on a stopped clock was on the house. Said come back in 2 weeks and we'd see if it held. I came back in 2 weeks. The clock was fine. I came back anyway. That's how it started, and I want to be honest about my part in it. Because for a long time, I told this story as if I were a sweet old fool who got taken advantage of, and that is only the comfortable half of the truth. The man at the clock shop lived, as far as I could tell, on next to nothing. He rented 2 rooms over the shop. He drove a Ford pickup that was older than my daughter and ran on prayer. He ate a lot of canned soup. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation, washed soft and thin at the elbows. When I asked about family, he'd get quiet and say he had a wife once, passed 11 years back, and a nephew down in Cincinnati who he didn't see much. The picture I built of him was a kind, gentle, hard-working man who'd had a hard run of luck and was getting by on a thin Social Security check and whatever odd repairs came through the door. And, Lord, did I take to that picture? Because that picture had a hole in it exactly my shape. It started small. I noticed his coffee maker was held together with electrical tape, so I bought him a new one. He fussed, but he let me. Then I saw the heel was coming off his good shoe, so I drove him to the outlet mall and bought him a decent pair. And I told myself it was nothing, a friend doing a kindness. Then the transmission went out on that ancient truck, and the quote was $1,100, and I watched his face just fall. And I heard myself say, "Don't you worry about that, I've got it." And I wrote the check before he could even argue. He tried to argue. I want that on the record, because later I'd accuse him of a lot. But the man tried to refuse me at every turn, and I steamrolled him every time. "I'll pay you back," he'd say. And I'd say, "When you sell that beautiful regulator clock you've been restoring," and we both knew that clock would take a year, and that was fine with me. That was the point. The owing was the rope that tied him to me. Inside of a year, we were courting, if 2 people our age can be said to court. Dinners at my house, drives out to see the leaves turn. He'd come fix things around my place that didn't need fixing, and I'd find new things broken to give him reason to come back. He was easy to be with in a way. Wendell, God rest him, never quite was. Wendell was a good man, but a closed door. This one would sit on my porch swing and tell me what he was thinking, and ask what I was thinking, and actually wait for the answer. I rented him a bigger workshop space out on Route 39 because he said the light over the shop was bad for fine work. I bought his brass and his oils and his little jeweler's tools out of a catalog. When his knees got bad, I paid for the cortisone shots because he said Medicare made him jump through hoops for them. I drove 40 minutes each way to take him to that appointment, and I felt sitting in that waiting room with his coat over my arm, more useful than I had felt since the morning Wendell didn't come back inside. My daughter saw it before I did. She came up from Columbus for Easter, and she watched me dote on him all through dinner, watched me cut his ham smaller because of his dentures, and afterward in the kitchen she dried dishes and said, real careful, "Mom, has he ever paid for anything?" I told her he contributed in other ways. I told her he fixed my gutters and made me laugh, and that not everything is about a checkbook. "I just don't want anybody taking advantage of you," she said. "You've got Dad's pension and the house and your savings, and this man drives a truck from the Ford administration and lets you buy his groceries. Doesn't that bother you?" It did not bother me. That's the thing I couldn't make her understand. The thing I couldn't even make myself understand for the longest time. It didn't bother me because every dollar I spent on that man was a dollar that said you can't get along without me. And after a lifetime of being needed and then a year of being needed by nobody, that was worth more to me than money. I'd have paid a great deal more than I did for the privilege of being indispensable. He asked me to marry him on the 2nd anniversary of the day he fixed Wendell's clock. No ring with a stone in it. Just his late wife's plain gold band, which he said he'd had sized down, and which I later understood meant he'd thought about this for a long while. He got down on one knee in my living room, and his knees were so bad I had to help him up after, and we both laughed, and I said yes, through the kind of crying you do when you've decided the second half of your life is going to be all right after all. We were married at the courthouse with my daughter and my sister and a couple of his shop regulars for witnesses. My sister wore a face the whole time like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. My daughter held my hand, and I thought, you'll all see what a good man this is. We didn't move in together right away. He kept his rooms over the shop, said an old dog needs his own corner, and I respected that, though it stung a little. I should have wondered why a man who claimed to be scraping by would keep paying rent on 2 places when my house was free and clear. I didn't wonder. People don't wonder about the things they need not to be true. It was the wedding paperwork that did it. In the end, we needed to get our affairs in order. 2 people our age, and I'd been after him to put me on as his medical contact and to let me see whatever insurance he had. Because if something happened to him, I'd be the one in that hospital and I needed to know. He kept putting it off, said it was a mess, said he'd handle it. And one afternoon while he was out at the workshop, I went up to his rooms with the spare key to find his Medicare card and his policy numbers myself. Because somebody had to, and because I was tired of being managed. His desk drawer wasn't even locked. That's the part that haunts me still. It wasn't hidden. The man wasn't hiding it so much as just not telling, which I'd learn is a different and slipperier thing. There was the Medicare card right on top, and underneath it the statements. Northern Trust. Fidelity. A letter from an estate attorney in Chicago about a trust. A property tax bill for a piece of farmland up near Bucyrus I'd never heard a word about. And the number? That number, with the 2 commas, on page after page. I sat down on his narrow bed, with the chenille spread, the bed of a man I'd been pitying for buying generic aspirin, and I added it up, and it came to more than $8.5 million, and I want to tell you I felt grief before I felt anger. Pure grief, because I've not married the gentle, broke clockmaker who needed me. That man had never existed, and I was a widow twice over now, mourning somebody who was about to walk in the door alive. Which brings us back to my kitchen, and his boots on the porch and, "How long have you known?" "Since before I ever saw you," he said again. He sat down across from me, slow, and folded his big hands on the oilcloth. "I didn't go looking for you, Marion. I want you to know that. I wasn't running some scheme. But I wasn't going to tell you, no, not at first. And then there wasn't any good time, and then there wasn't any way at all. You let me pay for your blood pressure pills, I said. The pills were what I kept coming back to. Not the truck, not the workshop. The pills. $11 a month for the store brand because the real ones, he said, were a luxury. You sat in my kitchen and let me clip coupons for your medicine, and you had $8 million in Chicago. I did. He didn't try to soften it. It was wrong. I know it was wrong. Then why? That was the only word I could really get out whole. Why? And he told me. The land up near Bucyrus had been his father's and his father's father's, 400 acres of good Ohio dirt, and back in the 90s, the developers came through and the highway interchange went in, and that dirt turned into money the way a caterpillar turns into something else. And he didn't do a thing to earn it, but be born to the right tired old farmer who never sold a foot of it cheap. His wife, the first one, knew. They lived modest anyway because that's how they were raised. Depression baby parents. Save the string. Reuse the foil. After she died, he said, the money just sat there making more of itself and he found he didn't want any of it. It felt like blood money almost. Money the land made by being paved over. And then, he said, there was the woman in Florida. He'd gone down there one winter after his wife passed, lonesome. And he'd met a woman at a church social, lovely woman, attentive, and for about 4 months he'd thought maybe the good Lord was giving him a second chance, until he came back to the condo one afternoon early and found her at his little desk with his account statement spread out and a notepad where she'd been doing sums. She didn't even seem ashamed. Just folded it up and asked when they were getting married. He drove home to Ohio the next morning and he stopped telling people what he had. After that, he said, I figured the only way I'd ever know if somebody wanted me and not the land was if they didn't know about the land. So I quit talking about it. I'm not proud of it. It gotta be a habit, and then it gotta be a wall, and then you walked into my shop crying over your husband's clock, and I thought, here's a woman who doesn't want one single thing from me, and I couldn't make myself wreck it. So you let me support you, I said, to test me, for 3 years. It wasn't a test. He looked miserable. It started as just keeping a thing private and it turned into something I couldn't undo without losing you. Every time you bought me something I wanted to grab your hands and say no, let me take care of you for once. But you wouldn't have it. You never once would have it. He met my eyes. You ever notice that, Marion? 3 years and you never let me pay for so much as a cup of coffee. Why do you suppose that is? I told him to get out of my house. He went. He didn't fight me, which somehow made it worse. He gathered up his little jar of brass screws and he stood in my doorway a second like he wanted to say something else, and then he just said he was sorry and he drove that miserable truck back to his rooms over the shop, and I sat alone in a kitchen that ticked. Because Wendell's clock was running fine now, 90 seconds fast, the way he liked it. My sister came over with a bottle of wine and a head of steam. She'd never trusted him. And now she was vindicated, and she enjoyed it about as much as a person enjoys being right about a thing like that, which is to say, she enjoyed it and hated herself for enjoying it. She called him every name in the church lady book of names, and then, 2 glasses in, she got quiet, and she said something I didn't want to hear. Can I say a thing? She said, and you not bite my head off? No. I'm going to say it anyway. You know what bothers me most about all this? It's not even that he lied. Men lie. Your Wendell lied about quitting the cigarettes for 20 years, and you let him because you wanted to. What bothers me is I think part of you is angry he didn't need your money, and that's a strange thing to be angry about. I told her she'd had enough wine, but she put her finger on it, and once a thing like that is said out loud, you can't get it back in the bottle. I lay awake that night listening to that fast clock, and I made myself look at it. I had not cried when I found those statements out of fear for my savings. I'd cried because the floor had come out from under the one thing that made me feel like I still had a job in this world. He didn't need me. He'd never needed me. He'd had $8 million and a paid-off farm the whole time, and he'd let me play nursemaid to a man who could have bought and sold my whole street, and I had eaten it up like it was love. And maybe, God help me, that was the only kind of love I knew how to trust. The kind where the other person can't get along without you, so they can't leave. My daughter, when I finally told her the whole of it, surprised me. I expected I told you so. Instead, she came up and sat at my kitchen table and said, "Mom, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I watched you with him for 2 years and I've never seen you that happy. Not even with Dad, and I'd hate for you to throw it away over the fact that he's got money." There's a lot of women would consider that the good news. "It's not the money," I said. "It's the lying." I know. But what was he lying about really? She turned her coffee cup around in her hands the way her father used to. He lied about being poor. You lied about being fine. You spent 3 years pretending you were just being generous, when really you were terrified to be alone again and a needy man felt safe. That's a lie too, Mom. It's just a quieter one. I went and saw a counselor after that, which at my age I'll tell you took some doing because in my generation you didn't air your troubles to a stranger with a notepad. You took them to the Lord and your hairdresser and you kept your chin up. But I went. A patient young woman in an office that smelled like a candle, and she asked me a question in the second session that took the wind clean out of me. She asked when, in all those 3 years, I had felt the most loved. I started to say when he fixed Wendell's clock, when he made me laugh, when he held the door. But what came out of my mouth, to my own astonishment, was when he let me pay for his medicine. She didn't say anything. She just let that sit there in the candle-smelling air until I heard it myself. "That's an awful thing to realize about yourself," I said. "Why awful?" "Because it means I didn't love him. I loved being needed." She thought about that. "Or," she said, "you loved him and you only let yourself feel it through the one door you trusted, which was being needed. That's not the same as not loving him. It just means you've got some narrow doors. We can work on the doors." Narrow doors. I've thought about that 100 times since. My whole life, I let people in through one narrow door. The door marked, "I can't do this without you," and I called everybody who came through it family and I bolted the other door shut. Wendell got in through that door. He was helpless as a baby around the house, couldn't boil water, and I loved being the one who knew everything. My children got in through it, and then they grew up and didn't need me, and I never quite forgave them for it. And here came a man who didn't need a thing from me, who wanted to give instead of take, and I had no door for that. I didn't have a door for being taken care of, so I built him a poor man out of spare parts and loved that instead. It took me close to 2 months to call him. He'd been calling every few days, leaving messages in that gravelly voice, never pushing, just thinking about you, and the clock holding up. And once just, "I'm sorry, Marian, that's all. I'm sorry. I saved them all." One night I couldn't sleep and the house was so quiet even with the clock running, and I picked up the phone and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the first ring like he'd been sitting by it. "I'm still angry," I told him. "No hello." "You've every right. You lied to me for 3 years." I did. "But I've been doing some thinking," I said, "and it turns out I was lying too. To myself, mostly. I needed you to need me. I needed it so bad that when you tried to give me anything, I wouldn't take it, because if you were giving instead of taking, then you might be a man who could walk away, and I couldn't stand to lose another one in a driveway some February morning. So I kept you poor in my head. I kept you owing me. That's a terrible thing to do to a person, and I'm only now seeing I did it." There was a long quiet on the line. Then he said, "I didn't want you for your pension, Marion. I want you to know that. I wanted you because you came into my shop and didn't ask me for one thing except to fix a clock, and in 15 years that had never once happened to me. And I didn't want you for your money," I said, "on account of I didn't know you had any. So I suppose we got at least one thing right by accident." He laughed, and it broke something loose in my chest, and I found I was laughing too, the two of us, a couple of old fools on the telephone at 1 in the morning. We didn't fix it that night. You don't fix 3 years of 2 different lies in one phone call, but we agreed to try on 2 conditions. Mine was that there would be no more secrets, not about money, not about that woman in Florida, not about anything, that he'd tell me what he had and what he feared and let me be a grown woman who could handle the truth. And his condition, which I didn't expect, was that I'd let him take care of me sometimes, that I'd let him buy the groceries and fix the car and, just once in a blue moon, let myself be the one who couldn't do it all alone. He said, "I don't want a nurse, Marion. I had a marriage where I was a project for a while, and I'd rather be a partner," which is about the wisest thing any man ever said to me, including both of my husbands and my own father. We went together to one of those counselors, the two of us, which 2 people our age, sitting on a love seat in front of a young woman with a notepad is a comedy if you ever saw one, but we went. He worked on telling the truth before it became a wall. I worked on my narrow doors. We did not become different people. He still pinches a penny till it screams, $8 million or no. And I still catch myself trying to manage him and have to stop and ask instead of just doing. But we tell each other now, messy and slow and sometimes at 1 in the morning, but we tell each other. He moved into my house that fall, gave up the rooms over the shop, though he kept the shop itself because a man needs a place to go. We put both our names on everything, the house and the accounts, both. And the first time I let him pay the property tax on my own home with his own money. I about choked, but I let him, and afterward it didn't feel like losing. It felt like being held up. The money I'll tell you about because it's the part nobody believes. I assumed once it was all out in the open, that we'd live like the rich people on the television, and I was bracing myself to hate it. But one evening he sat me down and slid a folder across the table, the same way he'd once slid that box of tissues across his counter. He'd been to the estate attorney in Chicago. He'd set up a trust for my daughter and a fund for the local clock and watch school he'd dreamed about for years, a place to teach the young ones a dying trade, and the bulk of it, the great bulk of that farm and highway money he'd never felt was his to begin with, he put toward a foundation to help widows in our county heap their houses after their husbands die because, he said, he'd watched too many good women lose the home along with the man, and he'd had the means to do something about it the whole time and been too busy guarding it to be of use to anybody. "You gave it away," I said. "Most of it. Kept plenty. We won't ever want for a thing, and your girls looked after. But I didn't earn that money, the land did, and money you didn't earn just sits on you like a hump if you don't put it somewhere good." He shrugged, the way he shrugs. "Turns out the only thing it ever bought me that I wanted was 3 years of you not knowing I had it." I look at him sometimes across the supper table, both of us old, his knees worse than ever, the clock running 90 seconds fast on the mantel because we never did slow it down, and I think about how close I came to throwing him out of my life for the crime of not needing me. I think about how I built my whole heart around being the one who carries everybody, and how it took a liar with a hidden fortune to show me that nobody had ever once asked me to carry them. They just let me because I wouldn't be told no. My mother used to say a woman over 60 had no business starting over, that you take what you've got and you make do. She was wrong about that, the way she was wrong about most things she said with her chin up. You can start over at 63. You can start over standing in a clock shop with a dead man's clock under your arm. The trick is, you have to be willing to be loved through the wide door, the scary one. The one where the other person doesn't need a single thing from you and stays anyway, just because the staying is the whole of it. The clock chimes the hour, a minute and a half early, and he reaches over without looking and takes my hand the way he does. And I let him. And that letting is the bravest thing I do all day. I came that close to throwing a good man out of my life for the crime of not needing me, and I've had to sit with what that says about the woman I'd let myself become. The truth is, every dollar I spent keeping that clockmaker afloat was a dollar I spent buying myself a guarantee that he couldn't leave the way Wendell left, in a driveway on a cold morning with no warning at all. I built him into a poor man out of spare parts because a poor man was a man I could hold on to. That wasn't generosity. I dressed up my own fear and called it love. And it took being lied to before I'd look the thing square in the face. Here is what I've come to believe, plain as I can say it. Love that's worth having has to be honest, and being honest costs you something every single time, because it means handing another person the truth and trusting them not to wreck you with it. He owed me that, and he failed at it for 3 years, and he paid for that failure. But I owed it too. I owed myself the honesty of admitting why I couldn't let that man buy me so much as a cup of coffee, and I'd been failing at that a great deal longer than 3 years. The part I tell any woman my age, if she'd let me, is that the brave thing and the smart thing usually turn out to be the same thing, and it's almost never the comfortable one. It would have been comfortable to stay angry. Anger is easy and it lets you off the hook. The hard work was looking at my own narrow heart and choosing to widen it on purpose, one day at a time, long past the age when most folks decide they're finished growing. I wasn't finished. You're never finished. The day you decide your character is set in concrete is the day you start dying early. So I learned to let him pay the property tax on my own house and not feel like I was disappearing. I learned that a strong woman isn't the one who carries everybody and never sets the load down. A strong woman is the one with the spine to be carried sometimes, to say I can't do this alone and mean it, which is harder by a mile than any sacrifice I ever made out of pride. Wendell's clock still runs 90 seconds fast on the mantel, and I've quit trying to slow it down. I let it run ahead, the way he liked it, the way the both of us are running ahead now. Two old people who decided at the last minute that the second half could still be the better half. The man reaches over and takes my hand, and I let him, and that letting still scares me a little, every time. I figure the day it stops scaring me is the day I'll know my heart finally got wide enough to hold what was offered all along.